I love at the heart of what Janice was sharing, and at the heart of what Sonny was sharing, is this idea that, no matter what's taking place, the love of God is present, the good of God is present. It's another essential thing that I've gathered from this teaching, is that no matter how happy or unhappy I may be, how free or how challenging things may seem, there's a sense of good that is always present, that's always there, that there's always something greater than I am that I feel has my good in its intention. That's not always necessarily looking out for me per se, but it's always there at my high moments and at my low moments. I want to talk about some key terms this morning related to our teaching. But before I do, just to get everyone involved, just to survey a little bit, how many people have been involved in this teaching just under a year? Under a year or so. Okay, thank you. Or a day or so, a couple minutes or so. How many people for under 5 years? Okay, under 10? Okay, how many people have been involved in this for almost 20 years? Okay, anyone here born into this teaching? Okay, quite a few of you as well, which is wonderful. I think one of the great things to do is to have the people that were born into this teaching share with the ones who just came into it what the teaching is, but then have the people who just came into it tell the people who've been in it for so long what it is as well, because you'll have equally as powerful insights. One of the terms that you'll hear here is the science of mind. Science of mind. That's an important term to our philosophy. It's the text that Ernest Holmes, the founder of this philosopher, started writing in the 20s, was eventually published in the 1930s. And one of the interesting things about that title is that it was initially called The Science of Mind and Spirit. And so one way of translating what the science of mind means is it really just means the study of ideas about how mind works and how spirit works. Holmes, if you were here a couple weeks ago, I actually quoted him as saying he doesn't know what mind is. He doesn't pretend to understand what mind is, although he does teach us that it's the greatest discovery ever made. He doesn't try to tell us what spirit is, but what he's interested in is how it works, and this is where partly that word science fits in. It's about how do we take an idea such as our attitude largely dictates the way our life path will go, and see if it resonates as true in our lives. How do we take an idea such as we are one, or we're connected with a mind that connects all of us, and experience and practice it in our lives, and how does that show up? That's a lot about what this thing called science of mind is about. Holmes uses an illustration. It's one of the only illustrations I think he uses in the book, which it makes it hard for some people to read. But he uses the illustration of a man who's really thirsty for a glass of water, and he's complaining about how thirsty he is. And he finally gets a glass of water, and he drinks it, and his response is to continue to complain about how thirsty he was. And it's a good and powerful statement, I feel, of the human condition and where I was too, kind of as a teenager coming into the material. Not that I was begging for a glass of water, but for some of us, we're looking for love, or we're looking for a sense of completeness. We're looking for a state of happiness, and we're searching and searching, and yet what happens is we define ourselves so much by not having those things that when they're there, when they're surrounding us, when they're fully available to us, we don't know how to truly accept them because we ourselves haven't changed. We haven't allowed ourselves to transform. And for me, this is a great call of science of mind to say, who am I going to choose to be, and am I willing to live a life of love, of peace, of greater prosperity and abundance? Another term that we hear a lot here is the term religious science, which is the religious denomination of the church that you're in today. And Holmes was once asked to define religious science in 25 words or less, and he took the pen to paper and he came up with this. He said, religious science is a correlation of laws of science, opinions of philosophy, and revelations of religion applied to human needs and the aspirations of man. So we want that one more time? Yeah. Religious science is a correlation of laws of science, opinions of philosophy, and revelations of religion applied to human needs and the aspirations of man. It's a great definition, and it speaks to me of two words that really define this teaching that aren't actually in the definition. The first is inclusivity. I'd say first and foremost, believe it or not, the reason why I love this church is because it's inclusive. And believe it or not, I don't think a lot of philosophies are necessarily inclusive. So I love that first and foremost, we're philosophically inclusive. If there's wisdom in Buddhism, we want it. If there's wisdom in Christianity, and there's Buddhism and Christianity sometimes too, we want it. If there's wisdom in Taoism, we want it. If there's wisdom in agnosticism, we want it. So we do not discriminate against wisdom in any of its forms. So we seek to bring it together, not so that we can master it, put it in a bottle and sell it, but so that we can celebrate it and explore it and become better people because of it. One of the great critiques of religious science is you all are just cafeteria-style religion. You just go around and you just pick and choose whatever it is that you want to believe, avoid everything else, and live your life from that. And that criticism is absolutely true. It's 100% correct. However, we could counter-argue that what religion isn't cafeteria-style religion? What religion or philosophy isn't pinpointing that particular verse in Scripture that they want to utilize to share their point, or pinpointing a particular idea to live from? We're just aware of what it is that we're doing. Not that we seek to have blinders to truths to life, but we seek to focus and practice what is most meaningful to us. The other word that comes to mind from that 25 word or less definition is the word evolving. I love that evolution as a word can be a part of spirituality. Not only can we celebrate Darwinism even to a certain degree as a beautiful act of God within itself, but we have this idea in our spirituality to always stay open. There's a central term we use called open at the top. It's actually signified in this insignia right here, this V that you see. And it's also in this beautiful stained glass window too, this idea of being open at the top. Charles Fillmore, the founder of Unity, used to say, "I reserve the right to change my mind." I always like that quote. And it doesn't mean that in our philosophy we don't have core principles and core values that tend to be unchanging. It just means that we value, just as much as anything else, staying open, listening to one another, not being hard-headed, recognizing that our philosophy shouldn't just be based on scriptures that were written thousands of years ago, but on the wisdom that surrounds us today and in the wisdom in your relationship and in your everyday life, because that wisdom and that sense of spirituality is something that can be everywhere. A final term to touch upon is just the term spiritual living, because it's on the sign outside. And we call ourselves Center for Spiritual Living. And the question is, well, what does that mean? Does that make me a spiritual liver? Does that make me a Center for Spiritual Living? And maybe it does. But I think the idea, to be honest, the term was brought up in terms of marketing and semantics, but I do think it speaks powerfully to this idea that we promote a spiritual practice here. We believe it's so important to enrich our lives through meditation, through affirmative prayer, through practicing gratitude, through practicing forgiveness. And we also promote the idea here to look at that in your life which you love to do the most, that you love so much you might call it sacred. Maybe it's cooking, maybe it's gardening, maybe it's playing a sport, maybe it's surfing, maybe it's a good conversation, but recognize that the sacred is something there, and that by being and bringing an awareness of the sacred there and openness to it, your life actually becomes more radiant. You build and cultivate a greater connection with the divine within you and all around you. And that's what spiritual living is. To slightly go back to this science word, because it can tend to trip people out sometimes, I think that when Ernest Holmes or people of that time were using the word science, or like religious science, They didn't necessarily mean get in there and measure things, or they even science in a philosophical sense, but what they meant was practical, applicable. So religious science, in a sense, could be translated as practical religion or practical spirituality, something that we can use every day. And if the science or the scientist means anything, it's a direction to us to take the idea, take the principle, and see if it will work in our lives. I can't just accept blindly that we're all one and say, oh, that sounds like a real nice, flowery, beauty pageant idea. We're all one. In order to really realize what that means, I have to go into my life and practice we're all one in a restaurant. We're all one watching Fox News or MSNBC. We're all one wherever we are, to see if that proves to be true for me. I can't just say I am prosperous in the mirror 10 times fast and expect some magical power to bring me money. I have to really practice the belief that I am prosperous, especially in those areas which may appear where I am not so at all, to be more open to a prosperous experience of life. And that's the idea, the science aspect of it. Prove this principle in your life. And it's one of the challenging things I think about our philosophy, is because where one truth may be absolutely so for one, it may not quite manifest for the other, in the sense of they haven't practiced it in their life yet. I love the story about Shunryu Suzuki, a great Zen teacher who was sitting in Zendo with some students, and he shared a very profound truth that was true for him. Later at lunch, there was a conversation going on, and someone corrected someone who was speaking. He said, well, the truth is, and just what Suzuki had said earlier that day. Suzuki was listening, and he said, not so. But teacher, the person said, you just said that this morning. When I said it, it was true. When you said it, it was false. And it can be true like that, even in our philosophy, certain very grandiose things that we believe. The idea is what can you embrace, make happen, and experience in your life? As the great Emerson said, life is a great experiment. The more you experiment, the greater your life gets. So the idea is to be conscious of what we want to bring into our life and what we want to attract in our life, so we can practice it with greater clarity. Holmes uses a great analogy for the divine. He refers at times to God being like a silent partner. God is like a silent partner in your life. In this thing called life, he says, you have a partnership with the invisible. Your silent partner, the law of mind, will always create the good you desire for yourself or others when you comply with its nature. He also says, life at the center of your being is a silent power. I like that. Life at the center of your being is a silent power. It comes to you as feeling, as conviction, as an inward awareness. Whenever you speak from this inward awareness, consciously recognizing that all the power that there is flowing through your words, then you endow your words with great power. So if we were to define a silent partner, we might say that a silent partner is one who isn't a secret to the outside world. There might be very much a public figure, yet they invest in the work of ourselves anonymously. We can kind of see how the divine might work this way. All of us are aware perhaps of some sort of divinity, or divinity that folks believe it in, but we don't always necessarily see it fully acting in our choices, in the work that we do. So that's one aspect where the divine is like a silent partner. The other is that the silent partner invests in the work fully, but doesn't run the day-to-day operations. And this is a great analogy that Holmes is trying to get across. We don't necessarily believe in a God who says, you will do this, and you will do that, and you will get to do this cool thing, and over here you're not going to get to do anything cool at all, who is a fatalist that decides how things are going to be for each and every one of us. We believe in a divine power that, if it could talk, could say, here you go. Here is all the power that there is, in the form of choice, in the form of affirmation, in the form of the willingness and the ability to choose love, choose being a presence for peace, choose a greater sense of clarity. Here is the power to do so many things. What will you do with it? What will you choose? And the power of the silent partner, it invests in us whether we choose to use that power constructively or destructively. It says yea to all. That's how powerful we are. That's what a big deal we are in our own lives, in the direction that we set, the course we set for ourselves, not only for what we will experience, but what we will choose to express, who we will choose to become. Another way to put it is this idea that God is always acting behind the scenes in our life. That if our life is a film and we are a character, the divine is the director, yet it's always working with an understanding or script that we help it with. What that means is that when we're in the middle of a scene and things are challenging, the crappy thing is we can't say, cut, get me out of here, change this person's role, create a new scene. We really have to do the transforming through our own character for deciding who we will now be in relationship to a circumstance or something that's going on around us. It's amazing, I don't know if you've known it in our lives, but even those little things that I've come to believe or little intentions that I've said, how they can come about sometimes without my knowing years and years later. I call these soul intentions. I don't always believe in this idea of soul contracts that before I came here I chose this person to be my parent and this bad thing to happen to me and this good thing to happen to me, but I believe that there's a connection we have with that spiritual realm within us that says, I want to know what it's like to love and be loved. I want to know what it's like to inspire and be inspired. Things like that. And so it's amazing, and maybe you found that, how things may show up in your life. I found a humorous example of this just a couple weeks ago. There was some articles coming out that it is the time that Marty McFly traveled to the future in Back to the Future Part 2. How many do we have any Back to the Future fans here? So, and the first one that most people see, Marty McFly goes back to the time of his parents and gets hit on by his mom and all that weird stuff happens. In Part 2, he goes 30 years into the future, which is 2015. And so we see all of these wild things going on. The most memorable is the hoverboard, which is a skateboard without wheels that flies around. And there's flying cars, there's self-walking leashes. There's individual reactors that are in each home. There's food hydrators. There's self-tying power laces, self-drying jackets, talking clothes, all these things. And it was amazing reading this article that almost everything in that film that we see now has a patent or some creative direction where it almost exists in some way today. If you YouTube hoverboard and Tony Hawk, you can actually see Tony Hawk. It looks a little silly, but on a hoverboard, it's really happening. The only thing that hasn't happened yet that did happen, that is the Cubs winning the World Series. So we still have to pour out for something like that. So I know in my own life, I really feel that my sense of spirit or my God listens to me better than I do. Next month we're going to be exploring this idea of going deeper into listening. But I really believe that the Spirit is a presence within myself that hears me better than I do. And the reason I've come to believe that is I've come to understand in my life that when I really wanted a thing or a person per se, I either A, haven't got it, or B, I got it and then struggled that it wasn't quite what I was looking for, wasn't quite what I was wanting. But what I have found is when I really have that heart intention, again, to love and be loved, to have an understanding of what wisdom is or of what grace is. That there is a wisdom or something always present to bring that about for me. I remember when I was 12 or 13 years old, writing down in a journal the intention that I wanted to be an inspiration or be a part of something creative. And it was just a couple weeks later that my big brother brought me to the Huntington Beach church. I remember early on in ministry getting really fed up with things not turning out the way I was telling them to, and deciding to give up on the outlining of it and just to give in to being a good minister, just doing the best that I can. And it wasn't several weeks later before I got a call from Peggy Price, the minister here inviting me to come and be a part of what was going on here at the church. I remember after working here, still living in San Diego, and I remember being on my third, maybe it was my fourth beer or something on a Sunday, which wouldn't be an abnormal activity, and finding that I was bored. Just realizing I was a little bored, and I thought to myself, I could be doing something much more constructive with my time. I even thought at some point, gosh, I wonder if I'd ever want to have a child. And I thought, no diapers. I would never want to do anything. I wouldn't want to do anything like that. 3 weeks later, little Gavin moved here, who was a little older, out of diapers, thankfully. And whenever he would laugh or he'd cry, my heart would turn to mashed potatoes, and there was this calling there to be present for someone. So we have to be careful what we ask for when we set those intentions, but when we really get to that level of the heart of what we're really seeking to experience in our life, always in my experience, God has answered me. Always Spirit has developed something, including everything I really wanted but I didn't even know, in a beautiful and profound, even though it's in some ways challenging as well. Holmes tells us, your first step is to come to a more complete realization of who and what you are. This is that idea of getting in touch with what your real intention is. Who am I and how do I want to experience it? Your next step is to enter into a more definite understanding of your relationship with the power. Can you allow those intentions to be filled with the spirit of life, with a grander idea? Are you willing to surrender your idea of how it's supposed to be to the idea of what it can become? And lastly, your final step is to use the power for yourself and others. As it says outside on the sign right now, life is God's gift to you. What you do with it is your gift to God. That is one of the greatest spiritual secrets there is. Not to not recognize that God isn't always greater than we are, but there's something about a partnership when we really realize that the divine is something that has been given birth within us, that we have not only the opportunity but the responsibility to share that wealth of understanding, to celebrate the miracle of life within us, whether we're up or down in our lives. To know that that spirit is creative, and if we allow it to fill consciously our choices, our relationships, our direction, anything can happen. Some final thought from Holmes. We must seek the source of life if we would live, and no longer seeing as through a glass darkly, we shall be gently led from our canyons of disillusionment into the fertile valleys of peace, through which flows the river of life. So just taking a prayerful moment in closing, I invite us to become aware of a river of life, so to speak, within if we can. And for some of us, that river of life within us has been filled with some crud. The crud of disbelief, the crud of a sense of lack, the idea that we are insignificant or not worthy of living fully. As we become aware of this flow again, it begins to pick up current. It begins to flow. It is not our job to have to remove the muck and the crud and the ick. We allow this flow to move fully and thoroughly through us, clearing out all that doesn't belong. It is now our opportunity to allow this river to flow through new and profound ideas of who we can be, not just in relationship with others, but beginning right now with our own self, to be a presence for love, a presence for good, a presence for the divine to manifest itself and take place. So allowing this flow, I know that for each of us, it can create amazing and wonderful experiences. The intentions we've set long ago that we bring back to ourselves, that we come back to like a spiral over and over, moving deeper, deeper into. May we open ourselves to the possibilities that they can create in our lives, and so it is.